If your brain never stops thinking, this might be the reason. You replay conversations long after everyone else has forgotten them. You imagine scenarios that have not even happened yet. And sometimes, your mind feels like it is always working, even when nothing is actually wrong. Most people call this overthinking, but psychology suggests something more complicated. What if this is not simply a weakness? What if it is a mental pattern your brain learned for a reason? Because here is the strange paradox. The same habit that makes someone thoughtful, careful, and emotionally aware can also become the reason they feel quietly exhausted. And for many people, that exhaustion does not come from doing too much. It comes from thinking too much. So if your mind often feels like it is always scanning, always reviewing, always trying to understand what happened and what might happen next, psychology has a lot to say about what that may actually mean. 1. Your brain is unusually sensitive to patterns. People who think too much are often very good at noticing patterns. Not just obvious patterns, but subtle ones. A change in someone's tone, a pause in a sentence, a delayed reply, a look on someone's face that lasts only a second. Most people let these things pass, but your brain does not. It catches them, stores them, and starts asking questions. What did that mean? Did something change? Did I miss something? Could that become a problem later? Psychologists often connect this to heightened cognitive processing. Your mind is not passive. It is active, interpretive, and constantly trying to make sense of the world around you. That can be a strength. It can make you more perceptive, more observant, and more emotionally intelligent than the average person. But it also means your mind rarely gets to be simple. Because once the brain detects a pattern, it wants resolution. And if resolution does not come quickly, the thinking continues. That is one reason overthinkers often feel mentally tired, even when their day looked quiet from the outside. Their brain was never actually resting. 2. Overthinking often begins as a way to stay safe. For many people, overthinking did not begin in adulthood. It began much earlier, often in childhood or adolescence, especially in environments where life felt emotionally unpredictable. Maybe the mood in the home changed quickly. Maybe mistakes felt costly. Maybe love, approval, or safety did not always feel consistent. In those environments, the brain learns something very practical. Pay attention. Think ahead. Notice everything. Try to predict what is coming before it happens. Because if you can anticipate the shift, maybe you can protect yourself from it. This is why psychology often sees overthinking not simply as a flaw, but as an adaptation. A very intelligent nervous system doing exactly what it learned to do. From the outside, it may look like worry, but underneath it, there is often a deeper logic. The mind is trying to create control in places where control once felt uncertain. That does not mean every overthinker had a dramatic childhood. It simply means the brain learns from repeated emotional experiences. And once a pattern of mental vigilance is learned, it can continue long after the original environment is gone. So the person may now be safe, but the mind still acts as if it needs to stay prepared. 3. Your mind often mistakes thinking for solving. One of the hardest parts of overthinking is that it feels useful. When you replay a situation, analyze every possibility, or mentally rehearse every outcome, it can feel like you are being responsible, like you are preparing, like you are working toward clarity. But often, the brain is not actually solving anything. It is looping. Cognitive psychologists sometimes describe this as the illusion of mental progress. The mind feels busy, so it feels productive. But movement is not always progress. And the reason this loop is so hard to leave is partly chemical. When the brain engages in problem solving, even imagined problem solving, it can release small amounts of dopamine. That means the act of thinking itself gets rewarded, not necessarily because you found an answer, but because your brain became engaged in the search. So overthinking can become strangely reinforcing. You think because you want relief, but the act of thinking keeps you inside the cycle. This is why simple advice like just stop thinking about it usually does not help. The mind is not being stubborn. It is following a pathway that has been practiced and rewarded many times. In that sense, overthinking is not just a bad habit. It is a relationship between attention, emotion, and the brain's reward system. 4. You may be more emotionally aware than most people realize. Research has found something interesting about people who ruminate more. In many cases, they also score higher on forms of cognitive empathy. That means they are often better at understanding how other people might think, feel, or interpret a situation. They notice emotional nuance. They hear what was said, but they also notice how it was said. They sense what changed in the room. They pick up on what other people ignore. This can make overthinkers seem unusually perceptive, and often they are. The problem is that perception without resolution becomes exhausting, because the more data your mind picks up, the more material it has to analyze. You notice the small shift in someone's mood. Then, you start wondering why it happened. Then, whether it had something to do with you. Then, whether you should have said something differently. Then, whether you need to fix it. This is how emotional awareness can quietly turn into mental overactivity. So when someone thinks too much, it does not always mean they are irrational. Sometimes it means they are highly attuned. The difficulty is not that they notice too little. It is that they notice too much, and their mind does not know where to put all of it. 5. Not all overthinking is the same. Psychology usually separates overthinking into at least two broad forms. The first is reflective rumination. This is the more thoughtful side of inward thinking. It helps a person process experiences, understand emotions, and learn from life. In moderation, this can be genuinely healthy. It supports self-awareness. It deepens emotional understanding. It can even make a person wiser over time. The second form is brooding rumination. This is heavier, more repetitive, more passive. Instead of helping a person understand their experience, it traps them inside it. The mind goes over the same thoughts again and again, but nothing settles. There is no clear conclusion, no real movement, only more mental weight. What makes this tricky is that many overthinkers move between these two states without noticing. A moment of reflection becomes a spiral. A useful question becomes self-criticism. A thoughtful review becomes a late-night mental loop. And because the shift is so subtle, it can be hard to tell when healthy reflection has turned into draining rumination. That is why overthinkers often feel confused by their own minds. At first, the thinking feels intelligent. Then later, it feels unbearable. 6. Your brain stays active even during rest. Neurologically, overthinking often involves a mind that has trouble going fully offline. The prefrontal cortex, which is involved in planning, analysis, and self-reflection, can remain highly engaged. At the same time, the brain's default mode network keeps producing inner commentary. That means even during quiet moments, the mind may still be working, reviewing, simulating, planning responses, rebuilding old conversations, preparing for possible futures. This is why some people feel tired after doing almost nothing visible. Their exhaustion is cognitive. Their body may be still, but their mind is running. And because this internal activity is invisible, it is often misunderstood. Other people may say, "You need to relax." But the overthinker is often thinking, "I am trying." The problem is not a lack of desire to rest. It is that the brain has learned a style of functioning that stays alert even during downtime. And over time, that constant alertness can affect sleep, decision-making, and emotional balance. A person may look calm on the outside while feeling mentally crowded on the inside. 7. The deeper issue is not thinking too much. It is not knowing when thinking is no longer helping. Thinking is not the enemy. Analysis is not the enemy. Sensitivity is not the enemy. In fact, those traits often come with real strengths. The problem begins when the mind keeps going past the point where thinking is useful. When the brain treats every uncertainty like a problem that must be solved. When every emotion becomes something to analyze instead of feel. When every possibility is treated like a responsibility. This is where overthinkers often get stuck. Because some things cannot be solved through more thought. Some things need a decision. Some need acceptance. Some need emotional processing, not intellectual control. And some simply need to be released without full certainty. That can be especially hard for people whose minds are built around anticipation. Because uncertainty feels unfinished. And unfinished things keep pulling attention back in. So the struggle of overthinking is often not about intelligence. It is about safety. A mind that does not feel safe resting will keep trying to earn peace through thought. But peace rarely comes that way. 8. Overthinking is not your identity. This may be the most important part. Overthinking is not who you are. It is something your mind learned to do. It is a pattern, a strategy, a style of mental survival that became familiar over time. That matters because identity feels fixed. But patterns can be understood differently. They can be seen more clearly. And once something is seen clearly, it often begins to lose some of its power. Psychology does not suggest that you can simply become a different person overnight. But it does suggest something gentler, that you can stop treating every thought as truth. You can stop assuming every mental alarm means real danger. And you can begin to understand that a constantly active mind is not always a broken one. Sometimes it is just a tired one, a careful one, a deeply alert one that has been carrying more than it needed to for a very long time. At the end of the day, thinking too much does not mean there is something wrong with you. It does not mean you are weak. And it does not mean you are failing at life. In many cases, it means your mind has become very good at scanning for meaning, protecting you from uncertainty, and trying to stay one step ahead of pain. That is not madness. That is adaptation. The challenge is not to force your brain to become empty. It is to help it realize that not every thought deserves your full attention. And sometimes the clearest kind of peace does not come from finally figuring everything out. It comes from slowly learning that your mind no longer has to work this hard just to keep you safe.